They blame women for loneliness, but actually, don't they want to be in community with other men? They blame women probably because women aren't having sex with them, but they don't want their company. So I came across this headline the other day that quotes, "I worry we are evolving a new breed of asexual, asocial males." My first reaction was, huh? My second reaction was, oh, of course this guy said this. So the guy in question is Scott Galloway. And if you don't know who Scott Galloway is, he's an author, podcaster, tech businessman, professor. Full disclosure, I had a very brief appearance on Scott Galloway's podcast, Prof G, earlier this year to discuss Bumble. And that's because I write about and yap about and edit stories about dating and culture and have for nearly a decade. Hi, I'm Anna. And I'm here today to discuss not only Scott Galloway, but the quote unquote masculinity crisis and the male loneliness epidemic. And I have a one-sided beef with Scott Galloway because this isn't the first time I'm talking about him. Last year, I published a Substack post that I'll link below about his quote that protesting is the new for Gen Z. Yes, he actually said that. And he said that in May 2024 when a lot of college kids around the US were protesting for Palestine. Scott Galloway is an interesting figure because he is clearly very interested in masculinity and Gen Z and that young people may or may not be having, and fertility. Even though he's interested in these topics that have been taken over by the manosphere and right-wingers, he is a self-proclaimed political moderate. He actually has a podcast called Raging Moderates. And he doesn't outwardly blame women for these problems the way that a lot of conservatives do, but he stops short of outright doing it. Young people are more knowledgeable today about consent and boundaries, and they're also more knowledgeable about different sexualities and ways of having sex, that it's not just P and V. For example, some young people do identify as asexual. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with being asexual. Someone give Scott Galloway a copy of Ace by Angela Chen. And I actually interviewed her in 2020 about the book, and I'll link that interview below as well. And Chen told me she wrote this book because asexuality is so misunderstood. She even said that asexuality is very much hidden. One thing I loved about Ace was that Chen really laid out the hierarchy that society places on romantic love and sexual love as opposed to platonic love. And she discusses how platonic love is legitimate. So yeah, I highly recommend reading that book, and I think Scott Galloway would really benefit from reading it. Young people are also dealing with a cost of living crisis. They can't afford homes. They can barely afford children. So they might not be thinking about settling down and having lots of sex and having babies because they can't afford it. Not to mention the reasons why people are protesting. A lot of young people care about other people and they care about human rights. And saying that protesting is just something that's titillating for them is really reductive. And it's wrong. I'm getting ahead of myself. You can read my Substack post below for everything I had to say about that quote. But right now, I want to focus on what Galloway said about masculinity and the male loneliness epidemic as a whole, beyond what Galloway said. Galloway's Guardian interview was part of a press tour for his new book, Notes on Being a Man, which I haven't read myself. But if you're interested, I can read it and review it for this channel. So let me know down below. And if you couldn't tell by the title, it's about men and about a crisis of masculinity and about the male loneliness epidemic. So this book adds on years of discourse about men and loneliness at this point. So let's talk about male loneliness, shall we? There are statistics that show that young men are lonely. According to Gallup data aggregated in 2023 and 2024, 25% of men aged 15 to 34 responded yes to the question, did you experience the following feelings during a lot of the day yesterday? How about loneliness? Now, conservatives and right-wingers blame women for this. They blame feminism. And Scott Galloway, while he doesn't do that outwardly, he basically stops short of doing that. The Guardian piece says that Galloway states that men need to protect, provide, and procreate. And he also says that women won't have sex with men if they split the bill. Now, listen, I've had sex with men before, and it wasn't because they paid for my meal. It was because I like them. So, men, if you're having trouble having sex with women, even if you're paying, maybe try being more likable. But Galloway does get it a bit right when he talks about the economy and technology. So let's discuss those points. First of all, the loneliness crisis doesn't just impact men. Let's look at that same Gallup data. It says that 18% of women aged 15 to 34 also responded yes to that question. So yes, there is a 7% gap, but women still feel lonely. In fact, the American Psychiatric Association found that in early 2024, 30% of adults say they have experienced feelings of loneliness at least once a week over the past year, while 10% say they are lonely every day. And young people were more likely to experience these feelings, with 30% of Americans aged 18 to 34 saying that they were lonely every day or several times a week. So no, sorry guys, you're not special little snowflakes for feeling lonely. And while at least one conservative man on X is wondering why people aren't inviting them to house parties anymore, women are yearning. The romance genre is booming. Romantasy is booming. Fantasy and longing and yearning are booming. And year after year, researchers at UCLA find that teens want more friendship on television, not romance. And I do think that technology is part of the problem. Research shows that social media isn't very social and doesn't really help with loneliness, especially if it's passive social media use, and it can actually increase loneliness. Unsurprisingly, face-to-face interaction lessens loneliness the most, followed by voice calls. Not to mention the rise of AI relationships, which both men and women are doing. AI relationships, like so much of modern society, is frictionless. And I honestly think that lessens happiness. I think that human beings are wired to work and wired to do hard things. And human relationships are hard. They require compromise. They require communication skills. They require vulnerability. And that's what we're losing when people have a relationship with a chatbot. But I'll step off my soapbox about that for now. Another reason why people might be lonely is because they can't afford to go anywhere, they can't afford to get married or have kids. And people are doing those things just later in life, partially because they can't afford it. Prices are increasing at the same time as young people are getting fewer job opportunities, partially because of AI. It's not a good time for recent grads out there looking for a job. So it makes sense if you're somewhat stuck in a holding pattern, living with your parents because you can't afford not to. And so if you live with your parents, you might not want to date, and you certainly don't want to get married if you can't afford a house or can't afford kids. While we're on the subject of economics, I do want to circle back to Galloway's quote about women not having sex with men if they split the bill. Now, I don't even agree with that. So, hey, I know that some women do out there, and that's fine. I do want to talk about how women have more financial freedom and more rights than they did 50 plus years ago. And that has resulted in more women being single because they can buy a house on their own. They can get a credit card in their own name. They don't have to rely on men for finances. And so they're not doing labor for men, including domestic labor and emotional labor. And I think this is the crux of why conservatives blame women and blame feminism. And I do think it's why they want to take our rights away. It's because they want us to be beholden to men, because they do want us to perform this labor. So they wrap it up in an enticing bow like, oh, don't you not want to have a job, and don't you not want to work and have the big, strong man take care of you? Meanwhile, there are so many men out there who are not in education, not employed, and not in training. And some women have to do professional labor on top of all the other labor. And they don't want to do it anymore, so they don't. And they don't because they don't have to rely on men. So then men blame women for not wanting to date them and for their loneliness. Meanwhile, men have been taught that the worst thing they can be is like a woman. And what traits do women have? They're vulnerable with each other. They show emotions other than anger. They hold that emotional labor in ways that men are not taught to. They go out of their way for each other. And whenever I talk about this, I think about the quote from the philosopher and feminist theorist Marilyn Frye. And when talking about straight men in particular, Frye said, "All or almost all of that which pertains to love, most straight men reserve exclusively for other men. The people whom they admire, respect, adore, revere, honor, whom they imitate, idolize, and form profound attachments to, who they are willing to teach and from whom they are willing to learn, and whose respect, admiration, recognition, honor, reverence, and love they desire, those are overwhelmingly other men." And in their relations with women, what passes for respect is kindness, generosity, or paternalism. What passes for honor is removal to the pedestal. From women, they want devotion, service, and heterosexual male culture is homoerotic. It is man-loving. So I wonder if that's part of it too. They blame women for loneliness, but actually, don't they want to be in community with other men? Because from what we've seen, men actually don't want to be around women. They don't want to spend time with their wives or the women in their families. They blame women probably because women aren't having sex with them, but they don't want their company. So I think for men to be less lonely, they need to put in the effort to be less lonely. They need to reach out to their friends and talk about something other than how much women suck. They need to maintain friendships. They need to ask questions. They need to open up and be willing for other people to open up to them in person, face to face, because that is what will solve loneliness. Not paying for someone's drink just so you can get them in bed, not taking away women's rights. Personally, I don't think telling men that they need to protect, provide, and procreate is the way to solve this. Male loneliness can be solved, but men need to do the solving. If you're still watching, thank you so much, and thank you for nearly 200 subscribers from my first video. I know a lot of you are muckers or fans of my friend Adam McIntyre, and I so love that you're here, and I love that you're here no matter how you found me. I'd love if you left a comment about how you found this channel and or your thoughts on this video topic, and whether I should review Scott Galloway's book or what other kinds of content you want to see from me. Subscribe for more videos, and thanks again for watching.